There are moments in life that require no thunder, no tragedy, no one hurting you one more time. Just a blink, a sigh, and suddenly, you know, enough. You no longer want to live in self-doubt. You no longer want to walk a path where every step feels like a trade-off with your own soul. If you've ever loved someone who made you forget your worth, if you've ever poured your heart into saving a relationship only to be met with coldness, silence, and manipulation, then this video is for you. Today, we're not just talking about pain. We're talking about the power of no longer reacting. We're talking about silence, not as surrender, but as a bold declaration. I have chosen myself. If you've ever felt lost in the narcissist cycle of manipulation, if you're searching for answers, for peace, or simply want to understand why you've always felt like you weren't enough, watch this video until the end. And if you see yourself in this story, don't forget to hit subscribe, because healing is not a lonely journey, and you don't have to walk through the darkness alone. Part 1, the moment of awakening. Have you ever experienced a moment with no screaming, no tears, no dramatic climax, just a long, quiet closing of your eyes, followed by a whisper in your heart, enough? It wasn't a dramatic breakup. It wasn't a soul-shattering argument. It was just another ordinary morning, and as you looked in the mirror, you saw a stranger staring back, a person who once smiled for others, who apologized for having feelings, who bargained with their own soul just to be loved. And then something in you shifted, quietly, without regret, a silent but powerful awakening. I can't live like this anymore. That is the beginning of freedom, but it is also the painful threshold of truth. Loving a narcissist isn't like loving an ordinary person. It's not a relationship between two hearts. It's a tug-of-war between light and shadow. One day they lift you with praise, make you feel like the most special person in the world. The next they stare through you with an icy gaze that makes you question your very existence. The most painful part isn't even the wounds they inflict, but how those wounds repeat in ways that make you believe, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I need to try harder. And that's how the manipulation game begins. You led into a maze where every clear sign is distorted. A look of impatience from them, you interpret it as they're just tired. A criticism, you label it being honest. A long, deliberate silence, you call it needing space. And so, you begin to adjust. Speak more gently, express fewer feelings. Hide your sadness deep inside, just to preserve a love that, in truth, you never fully received. But then something miraculous happens. Not a divine miracle, but a sufficient dose of pain, enough to make you stop. Enough to help you realize, real love does not make you feel small. It doesn't ask you to prove your worth every day, and it certainly doesn't require you to sacrifice your identity in exchange for fleeting moments of warmth. Awakening is not rebellion, it's a homecoming, a return to the intuition you once trusted, a return to the inner voice you silenced because you loved too much, a return to yourself, the one who used to be strong, used to believe in goodness, used to dream of healthy love, but was buried beneath tactics both sweet and sinister, from flattery to silence, from guilt-tripping to blame, from giving flowers to stabbing you with cold disdain. And suddenly you start to see the patterns, how they kind when you submit, how they distant when you need comfort, how they make you feel guilty just for having your own emotions. You realize they never loved you. They only loved the reflection of power they saw in your eyes when you hadn't yet discovered your worth. That is the first step toward power. Because once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. You begin to step outside the game, like a conscious observer replaying old footage of your own life. And for the first time, instead of blaming yourself, you embrace that past version of you. I didn't know, but now I do. From here, everything begins to shift. They try their old tricks, show remorse, share their tragic childhood, promise a blissful future. But the difference is this: you no longer need to believe them. Not because you hate them, but because you're no longer starving for that toxic affection. You've learned to love yourself, bit by bit, even if you're still healing, even if you're not perfect. You are you, real, alive, and unapologetic. You don't need to shout to reclaim your voice. You just need to stand still. And in that stillness, there is power. The quiet power of someone who no longer seeks external validation. The silence of a soul that has walked through emotional hell and chosen not to go back. And do you know what scares them the most? Not your anger, not your words, your silence, your refusal to react. And in a narcissist world, that means you've won. They no longer hold sway over your emotions. They no longer get to define your worth. They no longer have a key to walk freely through your mind. And they know it. They feel it, like an insatiable hunger. Because what they've lost is not just a lover, but the emotional supply that once fed their hollow ego. You are no longer the person who tried to piece together the fragments of a broken relationship. You are the one who understands now. Love is not about sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. Love is a space where you get to be full yourself and still be loved. Part 2. When you no longer need them to understand. In the beginning, nothing is obvious. There are no warnings, no alarm bells, just a vague feeling in your chest as if something's off, but you can't quite name it. You keep smiling, keep living, keep trying, but deep down you feel lost. And instead of questioning them, you start questioning yourself. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm overreacting. I'm sure they didn't mean it. These thoughts repeat like a sad mantra in your mind. And that is exactly how covert manipulation works. It doesn't scream. It doesn't threaten. It erodes you slowly, making you lose faith in your own intuition. That's when you begin to live in emotional self-censorship. You don't allow yourself to be too sad or too angry or too demanding for fear of being labeled as too much or too difficult. Just one yell, just one cold stare, one perfectly timed silence, one subtle phrase like, "There you go again," is enough to make you blame yourself. Not because of what they said, but because they've made you believe that everything wrong begins with you. And so you step back. One step at a time, that's when you start to shrink. You stop sharing as much. You stop confronting what hurts. You choose silence to keep the peace. You sacrifice your real feelings just to maintain a relationship that doesn't upset them. But the price of that silence is the loss of yourself. You begin to lose direction. You can't tell anymore which feelings are true, which ones you're allowed to feel. And the most painful part, you start to feel like you're going insane. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a long process of subtle manipulation that convinces you your pain is unjustified, that you're blowing things out of proportion, that if you were just more patient, if you just changed how you reacted, if you just controlled your emotions better, everything would be fine. But the truth is, you could do everything right and they would still make you feel wrong. Until one day, a sentence from an old friend, a random post you scroll past, a quiet night spent journaling, or a still morning when no one calls your name. And suddenly you see it, a flicker of light, but enough to illuminate everything. All those times you apologized when you weren't wrong. All those times you smiled to hide your hurt. All those times you gave them grace while no one gave you any. And most importantly, all those times you betrayed yourself to hold on to a love that was never healthy. Awakening doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it arrives in exhaustion so deep that you no longer have the strength to deny the truth. That's when you look at the relationship and realize love should not feel like walking on broken glass. Love is not meant to leave you in a constant state of waiting for them to soften, waiting for them to care, waiting for the day they finally see your worth. Love isn't a guessing game. It's not a silent exchange of affection and punishment. You once believed that if you loved hard enough, they would change. But then you realized true love doesn't require you to suffer endlessly. It doesn't hurt you and then tell you to grow up. It doesn't use silence as a weapon to train you into submission. Real love builds, it doesn't destroy. Real love is where you're allowed to be yourself and still be loved. Once you begin to truly see that, you can't go back. The things that once confused you now become crystal clear. You see how often they made you feel like you were the problem, when in reality it was their way of avoiding responsibility. You realize that the love you've been fighting to keep alive all this time was one-sided. You fought, you sacrificed, you adapted, while they simply watched. Sometimes with pity, sometimes with blame. And then you do something you once thought impossible. You stop. Not because you don't love them anymore, but because you've started to love yourself more. You begin to return to the person you used to be. Strong, kind, clear about what's worthy. And once you do that, everything begins to change. They don't understand why you no longer react the way you used to, why you no longer explain yourself, why you've stopped apologizing, why you no longer try to ease the tension every time there's conflict. But you understand. You know you're not selfish. You're simply refusing to let anyone else control your mood, your emotions, or your sense of worth. That is the kind of freedom you once thought was impossible. You begin to breathe again, deeper, steadier. You no longer need anyone's permission to feel enough. You stop seeking approval in their eyes, and most of all, you no longer need them to understand you because you understand yourself now. And that is something they can never take away from you. Part 3, silence is not the end. For a long time, you believed that if you were sincere enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, everything would be repaired. That if you just expressed your feelings clearly, explained your pain, tried hard enough to make them see how much they hurt you, then one day they'd understand, they'd change, they'd apologize, and you finally be healed. But healing doesn't work that way in a relationship with a narcissist, because healing never comes from an apology you have to beg for. It begins the moment you stop seeking closure from the very person who shattered you and start writing your own ending, an ending without their validation, without the comforting lie of we truly loved each other, without the excuse of I didn't mean to hurt you, just the raw truth. They don't regret it, and you don't need them to in order to move forward. That is the turning point. When you stop asking, why did they treat me like that? And start asking, why did I stay so long? Not to blame yourself, but to reclaim ownership of your story. To look yourself in the mirror and say, from today forward, I will no longer allow anyone to make me question my worth. And that is exactly where real power is rebuilt. They once convinced you that you had no choice, that you were weak, that no one else would love you the way they did. That if you walked away, you'd regret it, you'd be alone, you'd never find better. And when you started to believe it, you gave away your power. Not because they took it, but because you handed it over in a haze of hope and waiting. But eventually, you hit bottom, you get tired. So tired you can't even cry anymore. You're not angry, you're not analyzing, you're just done. And in that moment of emotional exhaustion, you receive an unexpected gift: clarity. Clarity doesn't come like a lightning strike. It arrives like dawn, slowly, quietly, without drama. It seeps into the cracks of your mind. Those cracks, worn thin by empty promises, by the cycle of returning only to relive the same pain. And then you see it. Love should never come with conditions, especially the condition that you must suffer to be allowed to stay. You start to remember who you were before you were taught to doubt your instincts. You remember being joyful, confident, clear on the standards of how you deserve to be loved. And it hurts, not just because they broke you, but because you abandoned yourself for far too long just to keep them. So you begin the journey back to yourself. At first, it's in small ways. You stop replying to text immediately. You stop justifying your need for space. You stopped entertaining the snide remarks and passive-aggressive questions. Then, gradually, you stop caring what they think. Whether they're upset, distant, or ignoring you, you no longer feel the need to fix yourself to calm their storms. You see the system they built, the reward and punishment cycle, and you refuse to be a pawn in their game. And here's a miracle. They feel it immediately. Your silence is not like before. It's no longer a plea for attention or a form of surrender. It's confirmation. A wordless declaration, I don't belong to this cycle anymore. From their perspective, you've become cold, distant, different, but you know the truth. You're not cold. You're just no longer driven by fear. Fear of losing them, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being labeled too much. You're finally learning to live not under someone's control, but by your own inner compass. You no longer dress for praise, no longer speak for approval, no longer smile just to ease their tension. You're not performing anymore. You're living authentically. And that truth, while not perfect, is entirely yours. The clarity you have now doesn't just help you see them clearly, it helps you see yourself. You're no longer someone who believes you must make a relationship work alone. You no longer think love is something you must earn through endurance. You've stepped out of the illusion and into reality, where your freedom doesn't require someone else's understanding, and they will try to come back in every way they know how, maybe with old promises, maybe with nostalgia, maybe with blame. But you won't be easily shaken, not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself more. You're not chasing closure anymore. because you already have it not from their mouth, but from your own heart. A heart now strong enough to understand not everyone is healthy enough to hold the place in your life. And you don't resent them for that anymore. But you also don't leave the door. Part 4, when you no longer have to perform. This is one thing the narcissist is never prepared to face. The version of you that no longer needs them. Not through dramatic vows, not through tearful goodbyes, but through silence. Through the way you no longer react as you used to. Through the calm look in your eyes when they expect a fight and you have nothing left to say. They were used to you shrinking every time they pulled away. They were used to your long, anxious text just to clarify that you weren't trying to start an argument. They were used to your endless efforts to be loved again. And then one day, they stop receiving all that. And in that silence, they feel it more clearly than ever before. The power has shifted. No more adjusting your tone just to avoid upsetting them. No more rereading messages to make sure you didn't say the wrong thing. No more apologizing just to keep the peace. You no longer live in a state of constant self-censorship. And this isn't rebellion. It's a profound awakening. You no longer have to shrink yourself so someone else can feel bigger. You begin to feel freedom in the smallest actions, wearing what you like, not texting first, saying no without explanation. And when they see that, they don't know how to respond. They used to be the center of your emotional universe. Now they're just a bystander watching you without any control left. At first, they think you're just angry. She's testing me, they say. But slowly they realize this isn't a tactic. This is a transformation. You're not playing a silent game to get a reaction. You genuinely don't need one. And that's what scares them most. In the narcissist world, they survive on your emotional reactions. They feed off your tears, your anger, your anxiety, your desperate attempts to prove your innocence. Every time you react, they know they still have influence. They're still in control. But when you're no longer triggered, when you stop decoding their vague words or reading into every cold glance, they lose their supply. And they'll try everything to get it back. They may return with unusual gentleness. They may try to awaken your emotions with old promises, sweet memories, or a rage disguised as being hurt. But this time, you're unshaken. Not because you're numb, but because you're clear. You see through every act, every move designed to pull you back into the place where you once lost yourself. You're no longer performing, no longer pretending to be okay, no longer trying to be the ideal partner, agreeable, pleasant, easy to soothe. You've taken off the mask you once wore to be accepted. You've chosen to be yourself, fully, unapologetically. And in that refusal to be a replica of yourself, just to be loved, you become unshakably powerful. The narcissist will feel this shift, not through words, but through the energy you emit. You no longer send a signal, please love me. You send a signal, I'm already loving myself. And that's something they can't replicate, can't manipulate, can't destroy. That's when you begin to break the cycle of pain, not with rage, but with serenity. You don't need to scream that they were wrong. You don't need to prove that you were right. You no longer seek their understanding because now you understand yourself. You no longer search for validation, you validate yourself. You no longer seek love as a handout, you generate it from within, and that's why you're no longer starving. They may return with familiar eyes, a voice that once made you tremble, but this time you don't tremble because you no longer need their approval to know your worth. This isn't rebellion, this is a new order, an order where you place yourself at the center, not as an object orbiting someone else's moods, but as the core of your own life. They might be confused, they might be angry, they might play the victim, but all of it is a reaction to a truth they cannot deny. They no longer own you. And when you look at them, not with pleading eyes, not with fear, not with hope that they'll become better, but with the eyes of someone who knows the truth and chooses to walk away, that is the moment your power returns. This calmness isn't coldness, it's healing. It means you survived the war within and emerged whole. You are no longer the one who exhausted herself trying to hold together a toxic relationship. You are the one who chose peace, integrity, and unconditional love from yourself. And that's what the narcissist never saw coming. A person who once knelt for love now stands tall in their truth and never looks back. Part 5, it's not about saying goodbye to a person, it's saying goodbye to an old version of yourself. There comes a day when what once caused you pain no longer stings. Not because it wasn't significant, but because you stopped playing the role of the one who must fix everything The narcissist might throw a sarcastic remark, suddenly switch off affection, like flipping a light, or punish you with silence over a small mistake. And instead of panicking and asking, "What did I do wrong?" you simply stay quiet, not out of submission, but because you no longer want to play that game. The day you stop responding according to the script they wrote is the day you begin rewriting your own story. You are no longer the one scrambling to explain yourself. No more sending long texts trying to clarify heartfelt emotions that they distorted. No more fearing their silence will be the end, because now you understand. If a relationship is built on threats, withdrawal, and emotional tests, it was never a safe place for love to begin with. And you've come to see something else too. You are under no obligation to respond to every tremor they cause. There was a time when you lived like an emotional sensor, constantly scanning for the smallest sign from them to adjust your behavior. If they were happy, you could breathe. If they were annoyed, you grew anxious. A change in texting tone, a subtle shift in expression, or a colder voice could send you spiraling into self-blame. That's not love. That's emotional survival mode, and you lived in it for so long that you mistook it for normal. But today, something feels different. You begin to ask yourself, why were they ever allowed to dictate my emotions so easily? And the moment that question arises, you begin to understand. You gave too much power to someone who never knew how to value it. That realization is quiet but profoundly powerful. When they try an old trick of being sweet, then going silent, then blaming you for being distant, you no longer feel the urge to prove anything. They might say you've changed. They might call you cold, difficult, or withdrawn, but you don't react the way they expect, not because you want to provoke them, but because they no longer have the right to control how you feel. You are choosing peace. And real peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of boundaries. And the greatest boundary you've now set is between you and the old version of yourself. You're no longer the one crying silently in the bathroom over a scene but no reply. No longer staying up all night writing, then deleting dozens of unsent messages. No longer so afraid of abandonment that you'd endure hurtful words just to be loved again. You're still you, but you're healing, awakening, and slowly becoming impossible to manipulate. What the narcissist didn't expect is that you stopped reacting, because in their world, control only works when you still feel enough for them to manipulate. When you still need them, fear losing them, or strive to make them see the light. But when you sit still, when you no longer try to make it right, when you refuse to step back into the old role, they lose the one thing they counted on most, emotional power. You didn't shut down, you simply redirected your energy away from them and back toward yourself. And there you found what had been missing all along: spiritual freedom. No more living on high alert, no more waiting for approval, no more riding the roller coaster of someone who always made you feel like you were lesser. You no longer need anyone to prove your worth, you already know it. And that makes you immovable. This calm isn't a mask. It's not the fake smile of "I'm fine." It's the result of a journey through tears, heartbreak, and nights so lonely that the only person left was yourself. And you embraced that person, the one who broke quietly but never gave up. Now, you're not living to respond the right way to them. You're living in alignment with yourself. You know when to reply, but when to stay silent. You know when enough is enough. You no longer react, not because you don't care, but because you value the peace you've worked so hard to build, too much to waste it on meaningless battles. You don't chase them, and you don't need them to chase you. Because real relationships aren't about who feels left behind. They're about who's willing to walk forward together into the light. And narcissists cannot walk that path because they don't know how to love, only how to control. They don't know how to connect, only how to possess. They don't know how to listen, only how to twist your words into weapons against you. But you're no longer standing on that battlefield. You've walked away, not with a slammed door, but with the quiet resolve of someone who knows their worth and no longer needs to shout to be heard. You are no longer the person who waits for an apology to move on, no longer the one who clings to half-hearted promises, believing that true love could still survive while your self-worth is eroded day by day. Now, you are someone who dared to rise. Not to prove anything to them, but to affirm one simple truth to yourself. You deserve a love that doesn't break you. The silence you hold is not revenge. It's a powerful declaration that you've stepped away from a war where the manipulator always won by making you doubt your own emotions and intuition. And the moment you stop reacting, stop arguing, stop trying to be understood, is the moment you reclaim full ownership over your heart and mind. You no longer live in those past versions of yourself. You've entered a new life, one where peace is no longer a distant luxury, but an intentional choice. A life where love is not a prize you earn, but the natural result of mutual respect. A life where you no longer have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's suffocating mold. The narcissist will never understand this kind of silence. All they'll see is the loss of control. But it's liberation. You're not seeking to win. You're seeking truth. You don't need them to come around. You don't need them to regret. You just need to never return to the version of yourself that had to ask for permission just to feel. And if you're somewhere on this journey, caught between hurt and awakening, between memories and clarity, know this: you are not alone. There are thousands like you, learning to be silent at the right time, to walk away with grace, and to come back to life in the truest sense. If this video touches something deep within you, hit that subscribe button. This is your space for the ones learning to leave without regret, the ones learning to love without losing themselves. And stay to the end of each video, because sometimes one sentence at the right moment can rescue a soul that once believed it could never rise again. You don't need permission to be at peace. You only need to believe that you're worthy of it, and you've already begun